Okay, consequences are terrible also for many people that think that this changement will be very expensive. And what do they have to expect about technology and innovation? I mean, a lot of technology that are competing now to be the technology of the future. What do you think that those technology will be selected, and then we are going to have few technology that respond to all the needs, or we're going to have an explosion and a differentiation of technology, like in the theory of evolution. I think, for example, to the energy and the energy saving.
Yeah, well, again, this is forecasting into the future. It's hard to know. My guess is, if I were to put a bet, there'll be a proliferation of technologies because there's so many different energy sources. You're thinking in terms of energy, but of course, there is a big program of research in biotechnology, which affects, possibly has payoffs in output growth. Now, there are two things that need to be, I think, addressed. One is that there will be certain types of technologies which will develop no matter what, because the payoffs are going to be, no matter what scenario you think of, the payoffs are going to be large. So, for example, development of for pharmaceuticals for AIDS, it's going to be payoff is going to continue to be large because there'll be a huge demand no matter what scenario you look at. Okay, increasing agricultural productivity in, say, China, Asia in general, is going to be large no matter what scenario you look at. It's going to happen. I mean, it's going to be, R&D is going to be placed in that direction. However, where the weakness lies in current systems is that, except in the last 5 years, 6 years, the energy sector is getting a lot of attention because of climate change. It's become a big movement. But if you ignore that, on the whole, technology is very rapacious towards nature, for the reason that nature is cheap. So you have to make nature expensive before the trajectory of R&D shifts towards conservation. I mean, you can't blame technologists for inventing, say, fishing gear. Take fishing as a good example of a technology which has been absolutely terribly destructive, because they have these, huge nets that just go right through the bottom of the thing and pick up whatever it wants. Meanwhile, it's destroying the coral reefs and so forth. Why? Because the coral reefs are free. They're not being charged for destroying the coral reef. So that's one example. The fisheries example is likewise for there are in poor countries over public health technologies which are in use in third world countries very often are extremely unfriendly towards workers because they're among the poorer people and their lungs may get destroyed and so forth. But who cares? Because you're not paying a price for it, so you innovate in that direction and then you use that technology. So I think there is a whole class of problems where I come back to the incentive structure now, having spoken about that, because the prices are wrong in the marketplace, the direction of technological change is wrong in the sense of it being predatory towards nature, since you want to discuss that in this interview there, or predatory towards the health of poor workers. Take very simple things. One of the biggest causes of female deaths, adult female deaths in India, takes place in the kitchen. The respiratory illness, because the stoves use fuel wood for burning, and the house is just full of steam, full of smoke. It's very well documented. People have got big prizes for investigating this problem. But after all these years, the poor people continue to use that same technology. The technology really consists of a bucket, by the way. And you cut a hole into the bucket on the side and put a lid, a sort of grate, and then cover the bucket with mud, clay, and that's your oven. And you place the twigs, leaves, cow dung, whatever your fuel is, underneath, burn it, cook your food. Meanwhile, of course, the kitchen is just filled with smoke. I've seen it. I mean, in my own house it used to be. And you read that, and it is now very well documented. It's a question, why weren't, if you look at the health cost, and you costed that health into the price of the product, then the direction of technology would have been very different. So,
it's not rational.
Well, it's rational for them to continue to use it because there's the other alternatives are too expensive.
In Italy, probably you know, there are lots of small and medium businesses. The most part of the gross product, for example, is produced by small and medium businesses.
Right.
Do you think there will be a role for the small and medium businesses in the innovation, or they have just to keep up, to follow?
That's a very good question. I'm not the right person. I don't know the answer to that. It's a very difficult thing. When I say I'm not sure anybody does, because when we think of innovations, we think of discrete changes very often because the data are there. Small firms, for all I know, are making small adaptations, which I don't know. It's possible. They're making small adaptations. Certainly small R&D firms produce big things. We still are in a world in which there are plenty of, backroom inventors, as far as I know. Yeah. My colleagues in the industrial organization tell me that there's still room for it. It's not only the big firms which are doing all the big innovations. The man in the garage working away comes up with
sometimes.
Yeah. And of course in the electronics, of course, in software, of course we know it's always pretty much all small. I mean, every big shot was one time a small shot when he discovered something very big.
Okay, last question. This is not a very good moment for economists, especially here in Italy. Everyone is shooting against them for not being able to prevent or also to forecast the crisis. So how can the economists redeem themselves, regain the faith?
Well, I can answer that because I and my colleagues at FEAM don't work are not contaminated by by financial experts. Well, I think there's a general consensus amongst us economists, and at least those who don't work in it, is that it's been a very, I mean, I won't say anything new because you probably read about it, is that the models are really lousy. That said, I don't believe forecasting is possible. I mean, the kind of remarks one can make is, well, within the next 30 years, there is a goodish chance there will be another recession in some parts, triggered by something which we can't tell. That's about as best you can do. I think it's an unfair criticism, because the same person who makes that criticism is the person who also says the economy is very difficult to understand. Okay, you can't have it both ways. If it's really difficult, you can't make a forecast on that. But what you can do, and that's where we are, I think the profession, those who work on the banking sector or financial markets can be criticized, is that there were many obvious things that needed doing right through the 80s, 90s, which either didn't get done or got overdone, which created a very nice atmosphere for a crisis to take place. The deregulation of the 80s was a momentum. And if you read, it's very salutary to read The Economist, Financial Times, not the Wall Street Journal, because that we know is, but The Economist is on the whole, they're fairly sensible, on the whole they're sensible. If you read their writings in the 80s, 90s, there's no question they were pretty unbridled deregulators. Very little caution about deregulation.